Hello and welcome back to the VITA training series. My name is Chris Moon. I am an associate teaching professor in the Ivy College of Business at Iowa State University. This lesson is going to be talking about how to determine the filing status for the taxpayer. This is very important for a number of reasons. Their standard deduction, whether or not they receive certain credits. It's very important to make sure we have the correct filing status. So let's just start with this box you can see that shows what it's going to look a little bit like in TaxSlayer. So it's going to ask, what is your filing status? And I will tell you, if you are at a site that is doing non-resident returns, it is extraordinarily important that you click the non-resident alien button on this screen. You can't start with single and then go to non-resident alien. You have to start with non-resident alien and then say whether or not the taxpayer is single or married. So just keep that in mind. If you're at a site that is doing non-resident returns, note that that is at the very bottom of the filing status, and you do need to click that first before you go on to single or married. All right, so let's move on to the rest of the filing statuses that we will see as we're filing taxes. Single, married filing jointly, married filing separately, head of household, and qualifying surviving spouse. So we will go through each one of those, and it's important, again, that you're taking a look at the client intake form, because there's going to be some really important information on here to help you determine the filing status. One thing that I did forget to mention is on that very first page, let me actually go back to that screen. You can see this underneath where it says non-resident alien. It asks you if you need help determining the filing status. Sometimes it's super obvious what the filing status is of the client, but also sometimes you're not really sure. Maybe someone is technically married, but they might have the ability to file head of household, or they're married and they may benefit from married filing separately, which is uncommon, but it does happen. You can do the filing status wizard to determine what their filing status should be, and we'll talk about some other considerations to make if you need to help advise them on whether to do married filing jointly or married filing separately. But the filing status wizard will go through a series of questions, and it will kind of walk you through what the filing status should be. All right, so we want to pick the filing status that is most beneficial to the taxpayer. I'll probably say this more than once, but married filing separately is usually the least beneficial filing status. There are limited circumstances where it's important for clients to do that, or clients are required to do that, but normally married filing separately is not a good status for people. If you're looking at the intake form, you can see a number of questions here that say whether or not the taxpayer is married, if they're legally separated, if they're divorced, and it's asking you for the date of when that happened. It also is asking you if they are widowed, if their spouse died either during the year or during some other year. This should not be overlooked, because there are filing statuses that benefit taxpayers who are widowed. So we will go through each of the 5 filing statuses. We're not going to talk about the non-resident alien in this lesson. We'll talk about just these 5 and how to determine the filing status. As a reminder, you can always look at the Lincoln Learn glossary if you want definitions for any of these filing statuses. If you look in your 4012, there is a lot more information probably than is available in the glossary, but as always, you can use the glossary. All right, so why is it important to know the filing status of the client? It impacts their taxable income, which will by default impact the amount of their income tax. The taxable income varies depending on what the standard deduction is. Standard deduction is different for single versus head of household versus married filing jointly. So it is important to make sure we get the correct filing status to get the correct deduction for the client. Also, it's important to know that certain filing statuses will limit credits or deductions that the client can take. So if you have a client, for example, who really does want to do married filing separately, it's just important to walk through with them what they're going to lose by doing that. And that is potentially going to be some credit. So we'll talk about that as well. What we are looking at for filing status is the marital status of the client on the last day of the year. So on December 31st of 2025, what is their marital status? If they are going through a divorce, but that divorce has not been finalized as of December 31st, they are technically still married on December 31st. So it is, even if the client is coming to you to get their taxes done in March and they say, I'm divorced, and they got divorced January 5th, that doesn't matter for the 2025 year. We're looking at their marital status December 31st. So they will file as a single person if they are not married on the last day of the year, if they are legally separated or divorced on the last day of the year. And legally separated is actually a legal status. In the state of Iowa, you can get a legal separation, which is similar to a divorce, but not the same. And so they would actually need to tell you that they have paperwork indicating that they were legally separated by December 31st. Or if they were widowed by December 31st and they didn't remarry during the tax year. Okay, so that is a circumstance where the client would file single. If the client is married on December 31st of 2025, whether they got married on December 31st or they were married the entire year, they probably will want to file married filing jointly. Under married filing jointly, you file one return for both spouses. You list one spouse first and then list information for the other spouse. It is important as you're going through, I'll talk about this later, but if you do a married filing joint return, when you're filling out the W-2 for the spouse, make sure you mark that that W-2 is a spousal W-2 and not for the original taxpayer that you listed on the return. So if the husband is listed first and the wife is listed as the spouse, when you do her W-2, make sure that you click spouse W-2. So if on the last day of the year they are married and live together, they live apart but they're not legally separated or divorced, if they live together in a recognized common law marriage, which the circumstances for common law marriage are many in the state of Iowa. If you've been told that it's 7 years, that's not true. You can be common law married in a very, very short period of time in the state of Iowa. It is dependent on a number of other issues. So if the client tells you that they're common law married, you can believe that and file a joint return for them. You don't need to question their decision. If the spouse, if the client had a spouse who died during the year and they did not remarry, then you can still file married filing jointly. So if a taxpayer comes in and their spouse died during 2025, they did not remarry during 2025, for the 2025 tax year, they can do married filing jointly. It is, if you are a married person, it is more beneficial to do married filing jointly than married filing separately. I do have a few clients that come into my tax clinic that really want or need to do married filing separately. The taxes are generally higher, you lose credits, and some other credits are reduced. And so a lot of clients, once they hear that, will choose to try to figure out a way to do married filing jointly. But just as an example, I've had a spouse or a client who will come in who is living in the United States, has been here long enough to file as a resident for tax purposes, but their spouse lives in another country and that their spouse has never been in the U.S., their spouse can't get to the U.S., and so they're not able to do married filing jointly. So that client will generally do married filing separately. Sometimes, we'll talk a bit about this in a moment, you have a couple where one of the spouses has some obligation where the government is going to take their tax return, and you can file a form to protect from your share being taken, but sometimes it's easier to do married filing separately. So in this circumstance, each spouse will file their own tax return. You cannot do this one and done. You've got to do one for spouse 1 and one return for spouse 2. So like I said, sometimes you have a situation where one of the spouses has an outstanding debt. The way to protect against that is to suggest to the client that they file Form 8379, which is the injured spouse allocation. So that isn't necessarily a guarantee that the spouse who doesn't have the debt will get money, but that spouse may get some money back. It's just dependent on how it's allocated. So if they do decide to do a joint return, you could file this form. All right, head of household. Head of household is a filing status that allows you a bit higher standard deduction than single, but not quite as high as married filing jointly. It is really important for purposes of head of household that you analyze the living situation of the taxpayer. A taxpayer may qualify if they are unmarried on the last day of the tax year or considered unmarried on the last day of the tax year. There are special circumstances for that. If they paid more than 50% of the cost of keeping up their home for a required period of time and had a qualifying person living with them for more than half the year. The qualifying person can be a child, parent, or other relative. And other relative is defined in Section B of your 4012, page B15, talks about qualifying person that will qualify you to file as head of household. So take some time to go through page B15, and that also references the term qualifying relative. So this does get a little complicated. The term qualifying relative is defined in Section C under dependents. So just make sure if you are trying to determine if someone is qualified to file head of household, I would recommend using the status wizard, the filing status wizard in TaxSlayer to help you with that, but also go through Section B and Section C of your 4012 to determine. All right, so what does considered unmarried mean for head of household? If they file a return that is separate from their spouse, so this is someone who is technically still married, but they're filing a return that is separate from their spouse, they paid more than 50% of the cost of keeping up their home, they lived apart from their spouse during the last 6 months of the year. So this is not a total of 6 months during 2025. It is literally the last 6 months of 2025. So since July 1, they have been living apart from their spouse, and they provided the main home for more than half the year of a qualifying child, stepchild, or authorized foster child. So this is a limited circumstance where someone who is married can file as head of household. There's another circumstance if you may qualify for head of household if your spouse is, so if you are filing as a resident, or if you are a citizen or resident, but your spouse is a non-resident alien, then you may be able to file as head of household. I recommend, again, go through the filing status wizard or the link here to what is my filing status. All right, Finally, qualifying surviving spouse. So I did talk about if you have a taxpayer whose spouse died during 2025, for year 2025, they can still file as married filing jointly. However, the following 2 years, so if you have a taxpayer whose spouse died in 2025 and they did not remarry, 2025, they are going to file married filing jointly. If they still don't remarry in 2026 and 2027, they can file as qualifying surviving spouse if they have a dependent. So there are requirements that they have dependency qualifications for qualifying surviving spouse. Make sure that you are looking at the rules for that under the 4012. It is another situation where it's very important that you are looking at the intake form to see if they have listed any dependents. All right, so again, it is just important that for purposes of making sure we get the lowest taxable income and lowest amount of tax legally possible for the client, and that we allow them as many credits and deductions as we can get them, that we get the correct filing status. If the person is not married and they have children, just make sure you're going through all the questions for head of household, or in some circumstances qualifying surviving spouse, to make sure that they get that status if they qualify. Things that we do not talk about in here, community property states, if a spouse, innocent spouse, or taxpayers who are not certain if they are in a common law marriage. So like I said, the rules for Iowa are, they're not necessarily that complex, but it's also not as simple as saying a number of years to be common law married. So if they are not sure that they're common law married, that is not a decision that you are able to make for them as the tax preparer. All right, thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you at the next lesson.